privilege to be here, and I want to start actually by talking a little bit about my hometown. I grew up in New York City at a time when the city was crumbling. Before it reemerged as a center of innovation and entrepreneurship and opportunity for youth from around the world. And looks like a scene from an old gangster film, doesn't it? This is the subway station from 2 blocks from my house where I grew up, and every day as I walked from there to school, I would tell my father about everything that I imagined for my city and for the wider world. And I had all kinds of wild ideas. I imagined urban bubbles of green there. And actually, many of my Turkish friends talked to me about the need to retain those bubbles of greens in fast-growing world cities like Istanbul. I imagined some things we actually have today. I thought about machines that could bring anything you wanted to your door with the press of a button. Except back then, buttons were these large metal things like the ones you use to push your seat back on a train, on a plane, not a train. I would think about, and this one I really like, I would think about a way that you could have a movie camera on you when you were on the telephone. This is when you used to have to dial a phone with your finger, and there would be a movie camera on you and on the person you were speaking with, so that if your conversation was going on across a continent or across an ocean, you would see each other while you spoke. That'd be something, wouldn't it? Of course, this is back when, in order to make a movie, you actually needed film. You know what film is? It's this weird translucent stuff that you put into a camera. And my grandmother quickly reminded me that it would be far too expensive to do that. And anyway, growing up in my neighborhood, I lacked the access to things like prototyping facilities. I lacked the access to people who could teach me how to build business models and partnerships and to develop, as the previous speakers have talked about, the kind of integrated team that could pull that off. And so I want to ask you, what's the situation for my counterpart today? For a young person anywhere in the world today who imagines something different for her city or for the world? And are we equipping her with what she needs, with the access she needs to take her own ideas and make them real? It should be a good time for youth. A kid today has everything from 3D printing hubs, cloud collaboration tools. A kid today has, guess what, video conferencing if she's got access to a smartphone and broadband that's free. Not the best ones necessarily, but anyway, a kid today should be equipped. But we need to ask, when we think about the statistics that we've heard, what can be done to equip her with what she needs to create a new world with all of the jobs for her peers that will be made along the way. In 2013, there was a 16-year-old kid named Boyan Slat, Dutch kid, and he was diving in the Mediterranean, and he saw more plastic, as he said, than fish. And he asked himself, why isn't anyone doing anything about this? And Boyan became obsessed with this, and he learned along the way that to use nets and other conventional means to clean up all this plastic would take hundreds of years, far too long, and settled on ocean currents. And Boyan had access to some digital tools. He did a TEDx talk, and he raised over 2 million euros, roughly 2 million euros, in crowdfunding. And he used these tools to get his ideas on the map. But what I want to focus on is not his solution, although it's vital, but on what the access was that allowed him to develop his ideas and refine them, build partnerships, and get them on the map. Every season, I work with young people from around the world in the innovation and entrepreneurship courses that I teach, not only for American but also European university modules in consulting with communities and companies. And let me tell you that young people around the world know that things could work very differently. I know this because I start these courses and workshops by asking young people, what in your world, and ask yourself this question for a second, all of you, what in your world is backwards the way it works? It should just work differently. It could be something in your community, in your town. It could be something in the devices you use. It could be something in an industry or in everyday life. Now, let me ask you for a second. Do you think when I ask this question that it's hard for young people to answer it? What do you think? I actually can't hold back the answers I get. It's like a swelling sea of answers that comes. And I believe the reason for this is that the young today haven't yet gotten completely used to the inferior way the world actually works. And I believe that there is a very brief window when young people can imagine a better way before they are all too often forced to plant their roots in existing and backward ways of doing things. Before they're forced often to rent their time to old organizations in old industries with jobs that were created yesterday. It's sad to me that that window should be so brief. And for those young people, I want to say to you today, we must plant a tree with its roots in the sky. We need to plant a tuba tree. When the great Turkish author Elif Shafak talks about the tuba tree, she stresses that its roots are not planted in the ground. She says, evergreen and ever bearing, its roots are up in the air, extending toward the vast blue sky. Imagine if young people who could devise solutions of their own that could become enterprises and whole industries, if young people who had it in them to bear fruit were not limited by their local entrepreneurship ecosystem, were not limited in this way so that they were stuck with their roots in the ground. What if their roots instead were in the sky so they might draw nutrients from ecosystems everywhere, and they might take advantage of the prototyping tools, the folks who can help them figure out how to develop a business model, the communities of leaders, every tool available in the ecosystems around the world. If that were the case, it would be a different world indeed. And we don't have the luxury of not planting a tree for young people in the sky, because we can hardly afford to keep competing just for the existing jobs. Too few existing quality jobs instead of growing new ones. We are losing our job creators. I call this job creator loss. And it is a vicious cycle. And yet, what job creators need, it's not such a big ask. We have the talent and technology to give them the platform they need. Majorities in every country aspire, around the world, majorities aspire to be entrepreneurs. And for the first time in history, we have the capacity to create a global platform that allows the young to take their ideas, build them, showcase their potential, and connect them with the resources and the opportunities to make them real. But we can't wait for the existing institutions to do this. Instead, we need to layer a new architecture over campuses and companies and across communities and countries, like Windows over DOS. You guys remember what that is? The disk operating system. When I was a kid, you had to use a computer, you had to write little lines of code. And what made it graphical was Windows. That's how Bill Gates got so rich. And we need to, and he just put it on top of DOS. Well, we need to do that. We can't rebuild everything from anew, although it's inspiring hearing what's happening here at a new university. We need to layer over and between our companies, our campuses, our communities, and our countries. Now, let me stick with Build, Connect, and Showcase for a second. Together, we, in this room, and I've had such inspiring people that I've had the opportunity to interact with already here from 37 countries, is it? We have what's necessary to develop a platform. And I want to invite you, although I think I'm the only American I've met so far here. I want to invite you to collaborate. We are building something called the Rebel-Based Platform. And we call it Rebel-Based because rebels, entrepreneurs, are the kinds of rebels we actually need. The ones that fight against old industries and old companies and old thinking and old institutions. But you know what? In order to be that kind of a rebel, you need a rebel base and you need a rebel alliance. And in less fanciful terms, you need access to an entrepreneurial ecosystem. So here's the good news. We actually know exactly what young entrepreneurs need in their ecosystem. And this is the simpler version that you can remember because it spells the word capture. But entrepreneurs need sources of cash and capital. They need access to market. They need production and prototyping facilities. They need access to talent and training, a base of users to try out and build their ideas, access to regulatory permissions and clearances, and then they need economic guidance so that their models can become real. That's the good news. But the challenge is to make this accessible to young people around the world because most don't have access to it. The way entrepreneurship works, and this is what makes it very challenging, is it works like a double funnel. And in our beautifully stretched screen, I actually kind of love the way this looks up here. The funnel on my side, on stage right, it's supposed to be a little narrower because the idea here is that if you're an aspiring entrepreneur, most of the solutions you create are going to fail. In order to create the solutions that drive a multiplier effect, and that in companies like the United States are, year over year, virtually the entire source of net new job creation. It's startups, even though it has to go through this process of creative destruction to get there. But this poses an extraordinary challenge for youth development. How do we help young people to fail in order to succeed? How do we make it permissible to fail in order to succeed so that young people can bounce back? And also, on the flip side, so that those whose resources young entrepreneurs need, the investors and the corporate partners and everyone else, have what it takes to identify promising young entrepreneurs and innovators in order to champion them, to invest in them, and to recognize them. If we can do this, if we can get the double funnel working, we can create a virtuous cycle of job creation. But again, the challenge here is that we need to both serve young entrepreneurs who create ventures that then hire others and create quality jobs for their peers. And also, we need to have experienced entrepreneurs recognized for their capacity so they can drive growth and innovation at existing firms. In order to achieve this virtuous cycle, and it can be done, we need to democratize entrepreneurship. The Turkish-American author Elmira Bayraslı, in her book From the Other Side of the World, mentions that, might not be in the book, she might have said this to me, she mentions that in Ecuador, levels of entrepreneurship are far higher than they are in the United States, actually. But you don't see as many well-known, disruptive, scalable ventures emerging because of what? Because the ecosystem isn't there. Moreover, there is a female entrepreneur's deficit in all but 7 countries in the world, and I haven't heard any of those countries mentioned today. And McKinsey, the consulting firm, estimates that without the full engagement of women, we are losing approximately 22 trillion euros in gross world product. Depending on whether you measure it nominally or not, that's about 1/3. But this isn't just a loss for women, this is a loss for the world. Moreover, we heard about the skills gap and the number of employees that can't find the young talent they need. Well, I'd like to turn that on its head. The skills gap is a matching problem, folks. The skills gap exists, and there's research to support this. The skills gap exists because young people are too remote from the opportunities and the skills building they need. So why don't we instead connect them with the opportunity to create those new enterprises? Moreover, as I'm continuing to talk about ways we can democratize entrepreneurship, we need to stop educating everyone as if they're in a group of people like them. We put the math kids with the math kids, and the engineers with the engineers, and the political science with political science. Okay, that's nuts, because in entrepreneurship, you need to put one of each of those on a team. I usually explain this when I'm speaking in terms of the movie Ocean's 11, where if you want to rob casinos, which is of course what we're really talking about here, you can't just bring in 12 pickpockets, or 12 safecrackers, there's 12 explosives people. You need one of each. Well, the same is true for entrepreneurs, even if we're not trying to do a heist at a casino. Now, I want to, as I'm moving toward the call to action here, I want to say that I believe we cannot count on those who are already established in comfortable positions to solve our problems. It makes me angry when I go to conferences and I hear about the solutions we'll put in place by 2030 or 2050 for problems that need to be solved now, yesterday. So instead, we need to democratize entrepreneurship and build a link across countries, genders, silos of profession and skill, and social strata. We need to create the basis to identify, champion, and resource entrepreneurs. You know, we think a lot about income inequality, right? And young people are fighting desperately just to have a seat at the table. Well, I say, let's turn that on its head. I say to young people, sit at the head of the table because you built it and it's yours. What we need to do is doable, but it requires a seismic shift. This is what we're looking at now, in terms of all those trees that don't have their roots in the sky. 62 years ago, the beat poet from my country, Allen Ginsberg, wrote, "I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness." Well, today, we are seeing the best minds of the generation on which we will all rely, stranded for lack of access. And I'm afraid we're seeing the worst minds of the yet last generation, geopolitically, trying to keep the soil for themselves so they don't have to compete. Take a moment and look at your own skin. Look at your hand or something. It looks alive, right? It looks vital. I don't know, maybe you're having a bad skin day, but more or less it's alive, right? It's only alive because the skills in that skin are constantly replacing themselves. And the same is true for civilizations. Great civilizations. I landed, was it yesterday? I can't even tell, in Istanbul, or in my hometown of New York, or here with people from all over the world represented. Great civilizations are built when we allow people from everywhere, of all stripes, to cross currents and imagine what the world could be like and make it real. Now, Amal, I'm not saying that we need to go into a frenzy of newness. I recognize that most of what we do in the digital space isn't worth a dime. In fact, the best thing my own mother ever did for me, I wasn't going to tell you this tonight, but Amal got me going on it this morning, it's night for me, was to cut the cord of our television. She finally admitted she cut the cord. Because, you know what? Before you plug in, it's important to unplug. And yet, nevertheless, we do have this global network. And what we need to do, if we want young people to have the opportunities and the access they require, is we must plant a tuba tree. For them, we need to plant a tree with its roots in the sky. Thank you.